Good evening. I would like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Identifying Funds and Raising Capital by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. Before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on the DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during the session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Please ask questions about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session where you will also get responses in the last 15 minutes of tonight's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. Finally, please note that the content presented tonight was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. And without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker. On this evening's subject, I'm very excited to introduce this evening's subject matter expert, Jake Kuzarek. Jake is one of the more visible and highly respected cannabis industry executives. He led the ArcView Group's business development team as vice president and oversaw and vetted hundreds of cannabis and CBD companies, focusing on driving sales and partnerships with over 300 million deployed into the sector. Jake is currently a strategic advisor for ArcView Consulting, where he helps advise companies on executing go-to-market strategies, licensing, valuations, analysis, and due diligence and expansion strategies, as well as president of the brand Substance, Pre-Rolls for a Purpose. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Jake to join me on screen. Welcome, Jake, and feel free to start sharing your screen and start your presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And I really appreciate the extremely kind introduction. And I want to thank you all for joining tonight. This is here to help you. This is here to be fun. So please feel free to assault the chat section with questions and Q&A. The team will be collecting those to give feedback, so we can cover those at the end of the call. And of course, one thing I wanted to say before we begin is look, not every company is going to be a fit to raise outside money. I think a third of all U.S. Startup companies only started with about $5,000. So needless to say, it's a nice to have, and it can really accelerate the growth of your business. But it is never a hard and fast rule that you need outside money to be successful. Well, without further ado, let me start our screen share. All right. Well, this should bring it up. Everything looking good. Excellent. And of course, Cannabis Pitching 101 is on the menu for tonight. Let's break into it. A little bit of background on myself. I'm Jake Kuzarek of the ArcView Group. I actually hold a couple different roles these days. I'm an investor myself, both in one fund as well as the company Wonder. I also, of course, not only consult with different brands, genetics companies, XYZ, but still do a lot of other consulting work, through ArcView. And here's a little bit of background on ArcView. For those who don't know, of course, Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo started this largest and oldest cannabis investor network. These days, much more of a fund, a broker dealer, and a consultancy. And you can see some of the companies that we, helped to raise their initial capital through ArcView: Ease, Meadow, Tokyo Smoke, PAX, MedMen, and of course, associations like NCIA, MPP, SSDTP, Canopy Boulder. I mean, all of these were instrumental in the growth of ArcView. But what did I do wrong on the last slide? I thought it looked pretty good, highly visual. Well, couple quick fixes. I used too many different font types, too many different styles. It starts to look sloppy. So just to flick back to this, you can see here, I got some things italicized, some things pulled out as a heading. You don't want to do this with your pitch deck. The starting point to a good deck is really getting your brand identity down on paper. You might have heard this referred to as a styling and branding guide. A lot of different design agencies will introduce you to different things like this. But ultimately, what it essentially is just kind of a guide for anybody that's talking about your brand, interacting with your brand, so to make sure that they follow the design principles that are true and reflective of your company. I'll get to that a little bit later and show some firsthand examples. But if you're making your own slides, I always recommend you keep it limited to just 1 or 2 different styles across your entire deck, maybe 3 total. And that means, something that's a different size is the same way something is a different font. You really want to make sure your deck feels cohesive and branded. All right, a little bit more of my background. As mentioned, I do some investing, but I've been in your same shoes as a serial entrepreneur. I had a couple companies go through the 500 Startups Accelerator program back in batches 2 and batches 5. I do a lot of advising and mentoring, including with Ease Momentum, Alchemist, 500 Startups. So this is my background, just so you're a little bit more looped in and you know who you're listening to today. All right. So let's start with the absolute basics here. What must my pitch deck include? And of course, not everyone agrees. 500 Startups is going to feel different than Andreessen Horowitz, is going to feel different than Guy Kawasaki, and it's going to be very different than what your average cannabis investor is looking for. But at the end of the day, the key to a good pitch is making sure that you're telling the investors what they're looking to hear. So I include a hyperlink at the end of the deck, but SlideBean has an amazing website, not only of different templates, but they also tell you what different major investors look for with regards to format. So you can see on the right, there's a little bit of a breakdown here. At the end of the day, you're going to always, really want to open your deck with your problem, then your solution. Then you can start getting into some of the deeper details here. But there are a core set of slides that are absolutely imperative, regardless of what sort of investor you're talking to. And of course, that includes things like including your ask. Surprisingly, not every company ends their deck saying, here's what we're looking for. So let's dig into it. The key to a perfect presentation. You'd be surprised. As you can imagine, investors don't spend a ton of time on each one of these slides. They really benefit from you consolidating your information, making sure that each of your slides are easily understood. The most relevant and important information has been pulled out into larger pull quotes, so they're never going to miss it. Always go with high-res images. And to even double down on that, make sure your deck includes images of humans, human faces. If I had a nickel for every deck I saw that was that just included, shots of their facility or whatever, it's a psychological element where if somebody's viewing this, it feels more personal, it feels more authentic. So don't forget about the humans. Always go high resolution with your images. If it looks crappy, if it looks like you just screenshotted something, you got hard borders on it, it's not going to showcase nicely. You want to make sure that any imagery that you put in there feels integrated onto your page. This goes back to what I was saying. You really want to limit how many different fonts you're using. You want to keep everything tied to your brand identity. No errors. I've seen investors say, I'm not going to talk to this company because they screwed up spelling an easy word. Surprisingly, yeah, it sounds nitpicky, but this is the first thing an investor is going to see representing you and your brands. If you didn't take the time to make sure that there's no spelling errors and it looks 100%, they're going to perceive that as you didn't give this the effort it deserves. It's disrespectful to them that you didn't take the time to make sure it was perfect. So, one thing that really makes or breaks it for any cannabis company, especially right now in this industry when there's so much consolidation happening, is going to be strong points of differentiation. It's not enough to go out there and say we have the best flower, or we have, the best tasting edible, or just use other flowery language. You really need to drill down and bring something unique to the market. Investors want to see that, buyers want to see that. And if you have ideas on points of differentiation and you want to make sure they're enough, let me know. I can give you some guidance there. And one thing I always like to add is look, you're still a startup. Nothing is going to be perfect. You know that you probably need some sales expert, some marketing expert, some supply chain expert for your team slide to feel properly filled out. Well, in the meantime, you can get away with adding an advisor that is a subject matter expert in that area. It'll prove to those investors, look, they might not have the guy or gal yet, but they still have somebody involved in this organization that knows this like the back of their hand. They know how to get stuff done, and they can be a trusted resource as the capital starts flowing and efforts start railing up. I will include this. It's a little bit of a joke here, but when you do your growth projections, you'll hear every bit of pitch training, every bit of investor saying they want to see that hockey stick growth. And what that means is you'll grow consistently until you hit a major inflection point in which revenues are expected to scale dramatically. So there's a little graphic on the good kind of hockey stick growth they want to see. So up and then up. And the last one here is you. I can't tell you enough the difference it makes to have a founder who comes across as professional and committed to what they're working on, and practiced. We'll get into the importance of practice in a minute, but let's go to the next slide here. So I always want to add these basics. I encourage everybody, screenshot or download this presentation after to make sure that these are top of mind. But if you're going into a pitch, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's in an office or even a coffee shop with somebody who's might be able to give you capital, you want to make sure you're looking good and feeling good. It is cannabis. There are a lot of flat bills. There are a lot of hoodies, and you can get away with being a little bit more, I don't want to say rough around the edges, but cannabis is an industry that has character. It has culture to it. It doesn't all need to be suit and ties. If anything, there's certain investors that would be turned off by that because it feels inauthentic. But in general, look, it doesn't matter what you're wearing it. It's how you're wearing it, the confidence you bring to the table, and just make sure it's buttoned up. No flip-flops, no crazy different brands. If somebody came and pitched me on their company wearing the brand of a competitor, I'd be a little bit sketched out. So let me know if there's any questions there. And then of course, eye contact, firm handshake, and smile. A lot of these investors that are deploying into cannabis made their money in completely different industries like healthcare, like real estate. They're going to expect a little bit of that polish. Now keep the small talk gentle. You never want to sit down with somebody and say, hey, glad we're here. Now it's time for the presentation. No, get to know them, build some trust, build a bond before you go into any meeting, if it's in person or otherwise. I'll challenge you. Pull open the LinkedIns of everybody who's going to be on that meeting. See which mutual friends that you have in common. Look at some of their past roles and see if there's anything there that you can use as a discussion point. To build a little bit of that personal bond. Oh, hey, I saw you worked with Joe over here. Oh, he's a good friend of mine. Or, oh, you grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Oh, you must be a big Red Wings fan too. So it's dumb, but you want them to feel comfortable. Their entire days are just getting pitched over and over and over again. They're going to remember the person that seems warm, that seems genuine. This is arguably just as important as what you're going to pitch them on. I will definitely say, be warm, bring positive energy. This is all really obvious stuff here, but be early. There's nothing more of a turnoff than having to wait for a founder to pitch you. Don't check your phone. I keep mine off. I mute all notifications during any sort of pitch. I've turned off my Slack. My Gmail's completely closed. My phone is even put on completely silent. I don't want it rumbling as it's going off. It's going to distract me. It's going to distract them. And of course, it isn't, sometimes it's helpful to look into their LinkedIn's, but that won't have all of the information that's going to be relevant to your discussion. Of course, also go onto their website, start to look at their list of companies that they might have invested in the past. See if these are any companies that you have a connection to, because there's nothing more critical than getting a warm introduction to these investors than hitting them up cold. I've made that mistake myself over the years and learned when an investor was kind enough to tell me the right way to approach it. But I'll tell you, Andreessen Horowitz, one of the leaders in startup stage venture capital investment, their first test in landing Andreessen's investment is to get a warm intro, either from a staff member or a company that they previously invested in. If you try to go in cold, it's not going to work out. So keep that in mind. It makes a lot of difference. And personalize your follow-ups. Please do not copy and paste. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you. See you next week. No. Cite something specific from your conversation, something specific from their background. Put as much care into this as you would personalizing your presentation for them. Because I have seen investors compare. They will literally share everybody at the firm saying, what did the guy send you? They send you this message? Yeah, and it's dumb, but once again, it's a way of checking who's taking the extra steps, who does it mean the most. So what have I seen that went right and what went wrong? Couple different ideas here. What I have seen work really right, is bringing that sense of enthusiasm without overdoing it. It's really easy to come across as inauthentic, that you're trying to just be Mr. Perfect in the situation and you're trying to tell them everything they want to hear. So investors want to hear about some of your flaws as well. They want to know about some of the struggles you've faced because you can use that to speak a little bit more about how you've overcome those problems. Show that you're somebody who has, flown in the face of adversity before and come out successful. The ultimate ace in the hole you'll have, and what I've seen go right, is if you can speak to a past company that you ran or you worked at in a senior role that was ultimately successful, not only in raising money, but thriving as a business for many years until their ultimate exit. Investors want to invest in those who've been around the block before. Some other things that you might not have thought of is solo investors. Y Combinator, for instance, they limit themselves to one solo founder per cohort at most. It just comes down to the fact that running a startup is an incredibly labor-intensive job, and knowing that there's support there, there's multiple people that are able to kind of drive the discussion, that does mean a lot. It's very easy, and every investor has seen a founder that they liked and ultimately backed end up burning out because it just was too much workload on their shoulders. I've seen people go into pitch meetings wearing flip-flops that did not go over very well. I personally hit up an investor via WhatsApp on New Year's Eve because I saw that he was a mutual connection on there. It's about a decade ago. Yeah, don't email over holidays. Don't, in general, avoid weekends as well, regardless if you're going in cold or warm. People, especially investors, want to feel comfortable when they're talking to you. So it is all about the confidence. You being invited to pitch a company, to talk to their analysts or their partners. It shows that they believe in you enough that they want to talk to you. So go in there, with a sense of confidence. Not everybody, very few people actually are going to get a chance to pitch in front of major investors. If you look at all investments, all startup level investments over the last year, only about 12% of those checks were greater than 250K. So in general, most of the money that's out there, at least 33% of all investments are $10,000 or less. So in general, it's a big vote of confidence if you get invested to pitch in front of a major firm, cannabis or otherwise, and don't forget that. But I will add that this is just as much about you vetting them as it is about them vetting you. If you are going to take money from somebody, you are tied in, you are married. It is a journey you're going to be on for the next couple of years to come. Case in point, on average, it's about a 5-year horizon. If you exit via merger acquisition, or about 8 years if you exit by going public. Needless to say, a lot of companies go public in cannabis in Canada or Australia. So the horizon to go public is significantly shorter in this industry on average. But still, you got to make sure you like them. This sounds dumb, but I've had deals fall apart because I've gone out to dinner with investors and they had one too many 2 drinks, and I realized I didn't want to be in business with them. I didn't like how they carried themselves. I didn't like how they besmirched other people in the industry. So at all times, understand that this is a 2-way street. They are not solely in the power position. You have something of merit here. Make sure you wait and find the right investor for you. Okay. As mentioned, this is cannabis, and you have a little bit more leeway to have fun with it. But this is kind of the default template here. Intro, and an intro slide really only needs your logo, Yes, have a logo. Don't type anything out. Don't send an investor a pitch deck if you have yet to finish branding. You've yet to generate a logo. You're yet to have a set of fonts that are your fonts that you like to use. You want this to feel cohesive and professional. You don't get that if you build something in 5 minutes in PowerPoint and expect it to showcase nicely. So first slide doesn't need much. Logo, name, tagline, that's optional. Your contact info and your social handles. I will tell you the importance of this can't be understated. I've seen a lot of people pitch live and you'll look around the room, every investor pulls out their phone and they're just taking a photo of that first slide or that last slide to remember, okay, there they are. I remember these guys. I'm glad their contact information's right there so I can shoot them something. So don't need to overdo it. Now, I'd go right into your problem slide after that, then your solution. I'm not going to roll through these one by one. I'm going to do that in those slides to come. But this is a fantastic slide to screenshot and keep in your back pocket for later. Okay. So building a pitch deck is a very labor-intensive process. And it's one that, of course, if your company has significant traction, is a lot easier because there's a lot more information to pull from, a lot more assets to pull from, a lot more data points to pull from. If anybody on this call, even if it's pre-recorded, has not yet reached that stage where they feel comfortable that they have the information necessary for a proper pitch deck, one thing that we did over at Founder Institute that I absolutely loved was Startup Mad Libs. So you might remember this from your childhood. My mom used to give me these as we were taking road trips. You know, you tell a story by filling in the prompts. You know, my dog jumped over. Yeah, you've seen these before. I don't need to go into it. But look, take this format, start thinking about your who, what, where, when, why, and your why now. Why now is this company a perfect fit? I like to add some things to avoid here. Don't ever say first and only. One of the quickest ways you're going to derail a pitch with a potential investor is to say, we're the first people to do this, or we're the only ones who do this. Every investor knows that's not true. Even if there was another company that came before you and wasn't too successful, every idea in some incarnation has been done before. And even if you disagree with that, doesn't make a difference. It's not what the investor wants to hear. It will read as, it'll hurt your credibility. And it will get them thinking about, well, I can disprove that. You got to realize as investors go through these slides, they're not thinking, oh, this is a great point. This is a great point. They're trying to poke holes in it. They're looking for different areas that don't quite check out that they can hit back and say, well, no, come back to me when you figure that out. They're looking for reasons to say no. So always keep that in mind. Now, like I said, if anyone doesn't have this, the deck will be shared, but there's the template, name of company, what are you developing? Who is it for? What problem are you solving? And what's your point of differentiation? If you get this down, this is enough for you to build, this is a basic elevator pitch. I'd say the overwhelming majority of pitches that you're going to give as a founder will not be 5 minutes, presentation, timed, on stage, anything like that. You're going to have a couple minutes at most. Maybe you met somebody on the floor at MJ Biz. Maybe you're getting coffee with somebody. You got to hook them early, and your elevator pitch is the best way of doing that. You want to consolidate your pitch down to something super, super short. I used to run a company that did subscription rentals. We said we were the Netflix of ties. Didn't really need to go too deep into it because they kind of understood what we were doing. In my next point, I would elaborate. Yeah, it's for, guys who are, wearing different ties to work every day. You keep them as long as you like. It's a budget friendly thing. It opens them up to new different styles. You start to realize, look, these are the points that I need to hit to get this person interested in me. So definitely remember, it's dumb, but Mad Libs can make a big difference. And don't go heavy into the jargon and buzzwords. That's another immediate way to kill a pitch. If you start saying we're an AI blockchain based company that helps you find which strain is best for you, great, but you don't need the AI and blockchain stuff. And if you do want to bring that up, they're going to try to poke a million different holes in it. So in general, really, really something to keep top of mind. And try this out even tonight. And I'm happy to review it. If you want to email me your Mad Libs and say, hey, Jake, is this descriptive enough? Does this kind of capture my idea? I'll give you a yes or no and elaborate a little bit further, of course. Now, let's start off with the template here. I'm going to use the classic Airbnb example that's used, probably overused. But this is the actual deck that Airbnb used to present to investors, 10, 15, at least 10 years ago. Now, you always want to start off with the tagline, as I've mentioned. If you have something that's a little bit meatier, nothing that's a huge paragraph, but maybe just a couple bullet points or a sentence or two that really describes what you're doing. You could think about putting this as a mission statement and making it a separate slide, like a slide 2, to kind of set the tone for what's to come in your deck, kind of outline before you give in. But if your mission statement is just something super light and playful, like Netflix for ties, yeah, you can put that on the landing page. I always love this advice. If you cannot describe what your product or company does in 7 words, go back to the drawing board. Once again, brevity is what works with these investors. And yes, contact info in your name. Now, the problem slide, it can either make or break your deck, because arguably, this is where you're outlining, this is what we're here to solve today. Airbnb solves a pricing problem, a cultural problem, and a technical problem. That's a really great way to break it down. If you look at the different segments on the left, it talks about culture, it talks about there's no easy way to book a room, it talks about price sensitivities around hotels. You don't have to spoon feed them and say, this is a price problem, this is a cultural problem. But in general, you want to keep it simple and outline that this is something that is a real problem. If you have data to support this, like, there's been a survey of 10,000 students, and 9 out of 10 students say, there's no great way to buy textbooks online. That's something that kind of paints a picture for why a textbook rental service would be a good fit. If you can't find those big facts and figures, it's totally fine. You're going to have the rest of your deck to kind of add additional ammunition there. This is where you can really hook them with an anecdote or a hypothetical hand raise. To explain what I mean here, there's been some really, really well done presentations over the years that start off with something a little bit different. A lot of people jump in and will throw out a fact or figure that kind of supports the point they're trying to make. But tell a story. The key to the best presentations are that they put you in the shoes of the founder, experiencing that problem firsthand. I'm in Denver. I went to go buy cannabis. It's only retail stores. There's no delivery, but I have a disability and I can't leave my house. The Denver market needs a delivery service. If you take someone on that personal journey, it's going to resonate with them in ways just simply citing facts or figures can't. And what I mean by saying a hypothetical or a hand raise is, something like this. Hey, before I begin this presentation, how many people in the audience have wanted to buy cannabis, but were unable to get it delivered? Okay, that's pretty much everybody, here in the Denver region. Well, what I'm bringing you today is this service that delivers your cannabis. A hand raise works because it gets the people participating. It gets their mind working, their hands working. And one of my personal favorites is definitely starting with a joke. It's easy to toe the line and overdo it and try to be too funny, but if you can find that right balance, that can be a really fun way to hook their attention. Slide 2 is where you're hooking them, and it's slide 3 in which you're really able to kind of knock it home. The solution slide. That's where you're introducing them to your concept. I never want to see a problem slide that doesn't include photos of the actual product. If this is your solution, if it's a web-based platform, if it's a new product form factor, hey, we're making these dog walker joints, I don't care. I need to see them, and I need to see them on the problem slide. You need to make it tangible for them. Even if you're early stage, invest in spending time to get those mock-ups of what your product is going to look like or what your facility is going to look like to paint that picture. Don't talk about we're going to do it down the road, because if you come out with that tone, they're going to come back with, all right, reach back out to me once you are down the road. Talk about benefits and not features. This is one that I think can really screw people up. They get so down in the weeds about, hey, our solution's the best because, we match people this way. Instead, just kind of look at your problem slide and say, all right, how do we solve each of those problems that we laid out? So give them real benefits, like save money, make money. Less is always more. This is true for your entire pitch deck, but especially on these key slides of problem and solution. You really want to make sure that they're going to, an investor is going to take time and go through your full deck. If you're hitting them with massive paragraphs of information and complex charts in the first couple of slides, they're going to just, all right, I don't have time for this. Let me revisit it later. It may or may not get revisited. So keep it brief. Use bullet points whenever possible. Don't use massive paragraphs, complete sentences. It's very tempting to do so, especially if you have a very highly technical solution. But you can put all of that additional context in your appendix. It doesn't need to be core to your deck. Keep them focused on the most important details. And I do like putting in user testimonials, and also, like I said, a little bit more imagery. You can always do a solution slide, kind of part one, and then part two, if there's some additional data points you want to get across. But let's move on. The product slide. As mentioned, you want to include what your product looks like on your solution slide, but you certainly want to dig into that. This is on your product slide. This is where you can start going into some of those features I've mentioned that really add, a lot of horsepower and explain some of those points of differentiations, which is so key to raising money. So as mentioned, less is more here. I have seen people do an embedded video. This can work if you're emailing your deck around. But most of the time, my guidance would be to have two versions of your deck. Two versions of your deck, one for pitching in person, which has no attachments, no videos, nothing like that, and one entirely for email distribution, where you do let them dig in. And if you got an explainer video where you've recorded yourself walking through your product, you want to do that, but you never want to upset the flow. You never want to take the investor off of your deck. You want to keep them locked in. All right, market validations, size of markets. There's, fortunately for the cannabis industry, there's been a lot of data. ArcView, BDS Analytics, Headset, Hoodie Analytics, Pistol. There's an insane amount of different options out there, and a lot of these companies are releasing public reports. Some of them are paid. Some of them, they'll release a snapshot or a summary that's public and free. So I would really recommend going to those websites and pulling the most relevant market data for your specific vertical. If you're in edibles, go to Headset. If you don't have this data, maybe find a friend who has it. But ultimately, there are a lot of these reports circulating. Don't be afraid to ask if you see someone else's deck and say, where did this amazing edibles data come from? Typically, they can point you in the right direction. And of course, don't forget to, what you'll find is most decks will have those data sources cited. You need to do the same. You can't just put random data saying, oh, it says online cannabis is a $26 billion market, which it is. Show exactly where that came from. It'll show you researched your deck. It's professional. But I will betray myself a little bit here. The market validation slide is often extremely prone to getting skipped by investors. Every deck they've seen throughout the course of that day probably had very similar data talking about how big of a market cannabis is. So it's one that, don't waste too much time on it. Just make sure it looks slick. And don't leave out an obvious comparable. Every company has, something in the market. As I mentioned earlier, you're not the first or only to really do anything. You can find somebody that is doing something semi-similar, even if you feel that's the case, and use their traction as a way to justify why your investment makes sense. Case in point, I'm, Stizzy, vertically integrated is raised X amount of money. Because, they continue to raise money, we think we're going to be successful too, because investors love vertically integrated businesses. Like I said, don't leave out an obvious one. I'll circle back on the competitive analysis slide as to why, and be realistic. There's so many, it doesn't work in your favor at all to inflate market statistics. If anything, if your realistic expectation, your realistic projections are smaller than you would have liked, that's fine. Because if you show your work about how you got to that number, that is more important than what the number ultimately is. The market slide is a great chance for investors to say, okay, they think they're going to get 10% market share. It's a $25 million market. How do they justify getting 10% of that market share? Who else is in the market that's a big competitor for them? I need to know that information. So showing your work, more important than what the actual work has to say. So keep it simple. That's kind of my mantra for this whole presentation, isn't it? All right, the business model. Okay, so simple projections, different revenue streams. For Airbnb, of course, this is everything from sponsored posts to, I think, advertising revenue, to the fees that they take on every transaction. For a cannabis company, for your average brand, this is, everything from D2C sales compared to your retail sales, compared to different collaborations you're pursuing, breaking it down to talk about what you're going to do in the California market versus other markets. You really want to break through and show the investors on the business model slide, this is how I'm making you money. And if it's just a simple answer like we sell cannabis, not enough. Dig in, get creative with it, show them some things they might not have had thought of before. For instance, hey, we have a background, putting on large scale music events. We're also going to put our cannabis products, at this music festival. And this is going to be a big revenue driver. And we're going to make money charging other brands to join the music festivals that we're putting on. So in general, business model slide just really needs to show them how you're making them money. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's no bigger turnoff than an investor getting to this slide and seeing something comically complex, like we're going to devise a new program for affiliates off of this, and this. No, they want to see tried and true techniques that have worked for other business. It's worked for other companies they've invested in. I do say that this might be all the investors care about, that it's really true in cannabis. Sometimes they'll skim just right to the slide. Maybe they'll spend a little time on problem and solution, but they want to know how you're making them money above all else. They are in business to make them and their LPs, their limited partners who've invested in their funds, money. So now competition. There is a link here to allow you to kind of make your own grid. But I really hate seeing a magic quadrant. That's what's on the right. Someone trying to do an X, like we're a little bit more up here, they're a little bit more down here. I think these things can be extremely confusing and a little bit misleading in many cases. So use a grid like this operation here, this example here with Google. Use check marks to designate and highlights to designate what you do and your competitors don't, and always be truthful. I've seen a lot of really kind of, a lot of really loose language, a lot of adjectives saying, this competitor doesn't have a pleasing user experience. Well, if you ask anybody on their team, they'd probably debate that and say our user experience is just fine. So don't use any subjective terms. You want to make sure that, given how small this industry is, that no investor can look at this and say, well, clearly they don't understand their competitive landscape because, yeah, I know their other competitor. Maybe I've looked at the other competitor's deck and I know for a fact they have a mobile app, even though you're saying they don't. So it really is worth your time to check through and make sure that everything you're putting on this page is 100% accurate. You want to use your competitors' logos instead of just writing out their name. In general, always use logos, especially if it's elsewhere, like on your team slide. You want to show that, if someone's skimming this, you can kind of piggyback off of the positive brand identity that brand is already established. Like if you have a team member that's, X Ease, yeah, it's definitely worth putting Ease's logo. So anybody skimming it can quickly realize, okay, they got some big talent to the table. So this is another slide, and I think probably the most overlooked one, because I already hit earlier on how important your points of differentiation are. This is kind of where you sell that and you kind of push it home. It can be notable team members, hey, we're doing a hardware solution that that reduces smoke, if somebody breathed into it. In that case, for my underlying magic, I would want to see somebody who did hardware engineering at a market leader like PAX to be on their team. So that can be your secret sauce, your underlying magic. Even just like we have somebody on the team from a large enterprise or a top competitor. Think about your X factor. Think about you, why now? Why are you better or different than the last take on? Yeah. So that's the number one question investors will have in their minds as they go through your presentation. They want to poke holes in it. And the way they do that is this better or worse than the similar thing I was pitched earlier? If you don't have an answer, it's like I said, it is a big issue. Get creative here, but figure out what your underlying magic is. Why are you the right person? Why is this the right time that you're going to knock it out of the park? This is one thing that I have to bring up. Please, 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 please do not ask investors, especially if you're cold emailing them, especially if you're coming to them, to sign an NDA before you show them your pitch deck. It's a real common trend with early stage companies to do this. Investors will not sign these 9 out of 10 times. If anything, it makes you look like you're new to this for asking them to sign an NDA. Because if they're seeing their day-to-day is reviewing dozens and dozens of pitches, there's no way they have time to, okay, yeah, let me kick this over to our general counsel to review it, and then I'll take a look. And no, investors want your deck and you want them to have your deck. Even if you make them sign an NDA, it doesn't stop them from screenshotting relevant sections, saving those, sending them around. They're not going to do this most of the time because they're trying to glean some insider knowledge from you. They're going to do it to pass to other investors to say, what are your thoughts on this? That's the little bit of an inside baseball trick that these investors, so many of them are personal friends. They are a little bit in competition with each other. They're all trying to get the best returns for their fund. But they also ask each other constantly, have you heard of these guys? Do you know this team? Do you know this sort of a model? Have you seen this before? So keep the NDAs out of it. You want them sharing it. You want them screen sharing it. And if you feel like you have some super, super, super secret sauce here, something where you've got strong IP developed, obviously don't go and explain all of your secret sauce on the slide. You can have a separate version of your deck that you can introduce after they've signed an NDA, after you've had a couple rounds of back and forth with the investor, and then you can go into that potentially sensitive information with a little bit of greater detail. So if it's super, super sensitive and you're worried about putting it in there, try to capture the sentiment of what that is, but it's completely fine to not include anything that you don't feel comfortable with. Go-to-market strategy, extremely important, especially in cannabis. This is obvious here, but for cannabis brands, so many early stage cannabis startup pitches say, we're going to use influencers, you're going to use social media, we're going to use AdWords campaigns. Like all of this stuff is a basic. When they want to hear about the go-to-market strategy, they want to hear about how you're going to make them money. And they want to hear specifics like, look, we're aiming for, 3 years from now, we're going to have 10% market share. We're going to be in this market, this market, this market. Then after that, we'll do another round of funding. We'll scale our team up. We'll start focusing on this market, this market, and this market. We'll move into this product and this product. That will bring our market share up from 10% to 20%. It'll take our revenue from 5 million to 500 million. They want to hear that this has been thought through. It isn't just what channels you're using, what tactics you're using. It's far deeper than that. It's how are you going to bring these products to market in a way that's going to generate significant returns for them, and put a timeline behind it. Now, sometimes people get away on their go-to-market slide, or they add a separate slide in which they put just a horizontal rule right across the middle of the slide saying, hey, we're here right now. We're going to move up this, here's 3 months out, here's a year out. You can do things like that to kind of visualize how your company changes as it raises more money and it hits certain milestones. But also don't clutter the page. If you have to move it to a separate slide, totally fine. You just want to make sure that this ultimately still feels really concise. Airbnb was able to speak to some extremely key partnerships. Kayak and Orbitz were massive players even 10 years ago when this thing was circulating. They're already talking about key events they have in their promotion strategy. And of course, they talk a little bit about features like Craigslist. Can't really get away with that these days, but and I will add, do not put the logo if it's not secured yet. If you have a big potential partnership that you're talking about, hey, Ease is going to put us on their platform, unless it has been secured, unless they've signed a document, even if it's a non-binding letter of intent, a non-binding LOI, and you have their permission, hey, are you cool with us putting your logo in our deck? It can be just as simple as asking that. If you don't have that, don't include it. Because as mentioned, super small industry, it just takes one of these investors or partners forwarding it along to that company and saying, wow, I didn't realize you were working with this startup. And then you have a real problem on your hand in which their general counsel's reaching out, telling you, hey, why are you promoting a partnership we haven't signed? Could be real serious legal ramifications. Fraud, if you're talking about partnerships to investors and trying to use that to raise money, which you don't ultimately have. The one thing I have seen is, trying to segment, different partnerships and key relationships by in talks, in progress, and then secured and paid. And I stand by that, but you don't include the logo if it's still in talks. You can gray the logo out. You can render it in black and white. So no, you can't really tell who it is or something like that. But yeah, you can't put it on there in its typical format. If they'd be upset seeing it in a deck, or they would be surprised seeing it in a deck, leave it off the deck. Oh, there we go. So team is absolutely key. Don't reinvent the wheel here. I also don't like how much text Airbnb has put under each of these different team members. You really just want to have three, how many photos of your exec team. So if you have, the CTO, a CEO, and a COO, all three photos, make sure they're consistent. You took them, they're all black and white, they're all professional. I've seen presentations in which you have somebody's wedding photo, somebody's Instagram photo, and somebody's random LinkedIn photo. It doesn't look cohesive. It looks sloppy, and it looks like, you didn't take the time to do that. You also, like I said, keep it really, really short, because investors are prone to skimming slides. Use bullet points, put their name, put their role next to it, put a bunch of logos. In this case, it would be RISD, it would be Facebook apps, Facebook's logo would be there for these guys. And, like I said, any other key information, but don't include huge paragraphs saying, this is Joe, our CTO, he's worked at Facebook and he brings this tech stack to the table. And no. They don't need to know all that. Just keep it high level. And of course, alma mater, if there's a really strong university, a lot of investors, especially if there's something like, a group of investors all from Stanford or whatever, and you have a guy on the team from Stanford, yeah, you're going to want to put Stanford's logo on there and play that up a little bit. Past employers, especially if they're notable, associations. And what I'm talking about is things like NCIA, M4MM, MPP. If you're part of these organizations, you support these organizations, you've been a beneficiary of these organizations, cool to include them. Patents and IP, accelerator programs like Ease Momentum, Founder Institute, whatever, you can include those logos, add some horsepower. And my suggestion here on splitting into 2 pages, you keep all of your C-levels, you keep your founders all on 1 page. But if you got some real top talent, enough to flesh out another slide, do another one, but also put your advisors on there. I love having a 1 slide for founders and then 1 slide for key investors, because I can usually, attract some big name investors with solid experience, big logos behind them. And that creates a little bit of a 1-2 punch by breaking it across 2 slides. Of course, the absolute key to any presentation is the closer, your ask. Why are you approaching them today? How much are you raising? It doesn't need to be entirely about how much you're raising. There's great decks that close out saying, hey, I'm also looking for advisory board members. I'm also looking for partners that can help bring us into the XYZ state. You can add stuff like that to kind of frame it, because even if they can't pull the trigger on an investment in you today, they might have another partner they've worked with or another friend who is perfect for that partnership or that advisory board. So don't limit yourself by limiting how much you're asking for. You want to flesh out what you need here. So what stage is your company? You know, a lot of these are basic questions that you're going to hear back from investors. If you're on this webinar, I'd imagine your seed stage, maybe Series A, if you've had a previous round, but I'd say probably the bulk of you are friends and family. So kind of like pre-seed. You haven't really approached, you know, any institutional investors yet. You've just been socializing it with people you know. You will get asked if your round has a close date. You know, if it's friends and family, you can get away with, no, we're kind of keeping it open, and then maybe we'll do a seed next year or something high level. But any institutional investors are going to need to know that information. Even if you close a big name investor, you don't include them in your pitch deck. You know, if, you know, say Gotham Green comes in, you know, they probably don't want that public. They, in general, you don't want to, investors, like I said, they're in it for themselves, and they're in it for maximizing their returns. And if they're seeing like another big firm like a Merida or Gotham is already in there, it might give them pause and say, well, this would have made sense if we were the first big money in. If it's these guys, they probably negotiated, you know, really attractive terms for themselves, and you know, we're not going to be able to get those same terms. So yes, do not include the names of investors you've already closed, even in one-to-one conversations. It's not really worth bringing it up in your deck. You know, if they ask for how much you've closed, you know, you can give that figure. Hey, we got about half of our round complete. We have 250 left. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have an investor that really wants to be in your deck, sure, you know, you can let them. Merida is big on that. They do a lot of press releases with companies that they've invested in. Regardless of the size check that they put out, they want credit on a press release saying Merida invested in your company. You know, helps them from an SEO perspective as well, looking like a top tier firm. So as mentioned, courting advisors is another perfectly fine to ask here. Key hires as well, if there's someone key, you know, someone you need on your team. You know, like I said earlier, have versions that are multiple versions, both public and private, if there's really important stuff that you don't feel comfortable sharing with anybody yet. You'll hear people talk about DD. DD just stands for due diligence. And you might want to modify what you're putting in your pitch based on who's doing that due diligence. If you know for a fact an investor you're approaching invested in a direct competitor, you probably want to leave off some of that secret sauce and just talk about things at a high level. So have multiple versions of your deck. And of course, for use of funds, a lot of people like to break it down as a pie chart. That's what I tell every company I work with to do. You don't want to have some crazy document where you have like a million different data points about what you're going to do. In general, just keep it simple. Or you're going to invest, 20% into expanding our head count, 20% into product, 20% into marketing. Just show that breakdown, and it can be on this same slide. If you want to add you have a great, CFO that's been helping you. You got financial projections, pro forma, all of that deeper investor due diligence and financial information. I would always suggest keep that separate. You can include it as an appendix. You can include it in a separate folder within your deal room, in an online repository where you're keeping your pitch deck. But keep it simple. I'll keep it on this because it makes all the difference. And of course, I'm going to skip closer here. All the closer really is saying thank you and restating your name, your social media handles, and where they can find you, your website. Okay. And now this is one thing that absolutely blows me away. This is the exact same Airbnb pitch deck, all of the same content. It's just been polished by a designer. So, 10 years ago, if you were to circulate a deck that looks like, what Airbnb put out there, you might get some bites on it from big name and, from prominent investors. These days, the bar has been lifted. Invest in something polished. Make sure it's true to your brand. It has your brand identity throughout. I mean, you can see it here. Their main branding color is kind of that salmon, and they're using it as on every single slide in the top corner. They're keeping themselves limited to 2 or 3 total different font types. They have human faces in here. They have little icons like the plane and the people to help explain different things. So clearly a clear coat of paint can make a big difference. And look, not everybody can afford AKQA and leading design firms. There are a lot of cannabis specific shops. There are a lot of different solo contractors and stuff looking to get more experience in cannabis that will do this work at a significant discount to build their portfolio. I've had a lot of success with students and career centers, especially asking career centers at different universities if they have any student run cannabis organizations. There's alliances across different universities, like Michigan State is tied in with USC, UCLA, Cornell, and a couple others, I believe, where it's like the Cannabis Business Network. And if you post something with one of them, it'll get shared across all of them. Even a request like this, like, look, I got a pitch deck and I need a competent designer to jazz it up. There should be some great cannabis experience. Always, of course, if you have an intern, you have somebody doing you a favor like this, I would always suggest pay them if you can. Otherwise, you find ways to still make it worthwhile for them, like finding ways to give them college credit, which is usually something the Career Center can help facilitate. Let's move on. Yeah, I've absolutely been blown away at the different templates that even PowerPoint or Keynote have. This here on the left looks like it's professionally styled and branded. It's a PowerPoint template. So don't overthink it. See what your options are before you plop down 5K, 10K, 15K at bare minimum is what you'd be looking at to get a styling and branding guide, a pitch deck together from a reputable firm like, 99 Designs or, any of these other on the right. You can go to Fiverr. That's one of my fun little hacks as well. As I would always suggest, though, that you pay for unlimited revisions. When my wife was building a website for her small business, she needed a logo and she needed a Wix page. She went to Fiverr. She got what she needed. We made a million different revisions, and we did not regret it. So yeah, you can start with Fiverr. Let's see. Moving on. Okay. Now this one, sage advice here, but if you're given a presentation and you screw up, you don't say, sorry about that. Can I start over? No, you have to train yourself to power through. You don't reset. You don't go back to slide one. You soldier on. Investors, it will be a negative if you try to say, I want to go back and start again. No, they need to feel that you're practiced. They know that everybody screws up from time to time. It's all about how you deal with it. It's how you respond to it. It's how you adapt and move on. And the only way to get really good at that is by practicing a lot. Now, one of my favorite tips and tricks is to pitch your Uber driver. Yeah. Even if you're driving home from an event, you're at an event, you're talking cannabis with cannabis people left and right. You get really dialed into your pitch. We're doing a vertically integrated company that's based here in LA, and we focus primarily on edibles. That all sounds great if you're at a Green Street event, but if you're talking to your Uber driver, they're going to say, whoa, slow down. Vertically integrated edibles. So you mean like gummies and stuff, so once again, practice, but practice with different personas. Don't just hit cannabis people. Don't just hit your parents that are going to tell you you're beautiful and you did a great job. You need to try different points of feedback, including pitch competitions. If it's free, if it's a couple $100 or something to sign up, a lot of these can be worthwhile as long as they're giving you solid feedback. If they're not, if they're just giving you kind of half-hearted, needs a little bit more traction, it's probably not worth your time. Talk to companies who've gone through and done these pitch events and stuff before, ask them about their experience, then make up your mind if you want to do them. Now, you can practice giving your full pitch, but your 30-second elevator, here's who we are, here's what we're doing, here's who it's for, here's why now. This is what you're going to give most commonly. So never stop giving it. And make sure your team gets practice too. If you're adding anybody to the team, a new hire, or it's somebody you've been working with for years, make sure they have the pitch down, work with them, practice with them. As co-founder or as founder, if you're on this call, this falls into your court as CEO. You've probably heard people say that, the CEO at any startup is the biggest cheerleader. They're out there to get people excited. They want to be there connecting as many dots as they can. That's true. But the other side of the coin is being a good leader. And that comes with making sure that the resources you surround yourself, the team you surround yourself, carries themselves at the same standard you do. They're not going to go in there. They're not going to start talking badly about a competitor. That really kills a lot of pitches. If you start, you think you're cool with an investor, you start trashing somebody in the industry. Oh, I don't like these guys a lot, or yeah, this firm, they're a bunch of jerks. Doesn't make a difference if it's true. Doesn't make a difference if it's somebody that universally people don't like. A lot of people don't like Dan Blazarian. A lot of people don't like MedMen. But you're never safe going into one of these meetings and trash talking anybody. That negativity is a big turnoff. It's not what professional founders do. The investor probably already know those guys are problematic and doesn't like them. Doesn't give you any cool points for acting like you know. I see the same thing all the time with name dropping. You can do a little bit of this, especially before you begin your pitch and you're trying to build that personal connection, because you have things to go off of. Oh, I saw this guy. But there's nothing worse than, an investor mentions somebody and then you hear the founder jump in. Oh, this guy? Oh, yeah, I know him. And it just goes on and on and on. Because what are they going to say to that other than, okay, cool. Yeah, I know him too. Like, it doesn't add it doesn't add what you think it adds. Instead, keep it about you, keep it about your pitch. That's what they're here for, not for small talk about the industry. Don't forget the follow-ups, personalized, as mentioned. Don't copy and paste those over and over. As mentioned, getting the intro is often your first step. You want a warm intro. You don't want somebody that's going to, and even if it is a warm intro, you don't want somebody that's going to try to sell the investor on your behalf. You'll trust that person, that they've already spoken with the investor. They already gave them a high level around what you're doing. And that investor said, yeah, I'd love to connect with them. So if you get connected to a big investor, the number one thing you want to do in that email is to just say, great to meet you. Here's our information, here's our website or whatever. Don't need to sell them on anything. A lot of times, here's our deal room as a hyperlink is fine, but don't try to sell them and send some huge paragraph explaining who you are and what you're doing. That email needs to be 5 sentences or less. And the most important one is your last one saying, do you have time to meet to discuss this tomorrow or the day after? Either happy to get together for an in-person if you're local. Otherwise, let's do a call. Because if you're connected to an investor, they want to scan that email. They want to see what the point is. This guy's asking for a call. Is it this time or this time? Give them 2 options. Usually it goes a little bit better. Don't just hit them with a Calendly link. You're being introduced to them. It's your time you're getting, saying, hey, now go on my Calendly and pick what works best for you. No, it may feel like it's more efficient, but investment is something that always carries a little bit of a formal process around it. Play the game, give them some times, keep them focused on meeting with you. And if that time works, not having to make a decision on your company during the intro phase, and be memorable. Now, I can't derail the webinar to pull this video up, but I would suggest that everybody does give this one a spin. From the Startup Grind Global Conference in Redwood City, probably 7 years ago, this guy gave this pitch that's so strong. I've heard investors, even in the last year, bringing it up. It's a guy who did a party supplies rental service called Big Fun or something like that. But their founder, Big Willie G, he started his pitch just getting everyone in the room's attention. He just let out a huge scream and he goes, that's what I dealt with when I was trying to throw parties and I had no solutions. No one could help me with this. No one could help me with this. And at first everyone's like, this guy crazy? Is there a medical incident happening? Why is this guy screaming? But there's not a single investor or other founder in that room who didn't internalize that. He ended up winning the pitch competition. Part of it was probably the merit of what he was doing, but most of it was the strength of that pitch. So don't be afraid to let your personality shine. Okay. You are the focal point. Don't fidget. Scan the room. Especially if you're pitching to you're part of an accelerator, pitching to a room full of investors. You're in a boardroom to pitching. Make sure you look at everybody. I can't even tell you the amount of founders I've seen, and even being in rooms while investors are pitching, and they only look at the main investor. They only look at the principal, or even worse, they only look at the men. I've seen that happen too. You want to make sure you give everyone equal respect because you're delivering it to everybody in the room. So scan as you're going. There's great presentations, people, 500 startups, Y Combinator, every one of them will be the exact same with regards to how that founder is scanning the room. They pick out people in the audience, they pick out people, and they make sure they keep their heads going. Tell them a story. That's what I said earlier. Be relatable, be likable, get them to understand the scope of the issue. This is repetitive. Get rid of buzzwords in there. And I have hyperlinked a bunch of different examples. Some good pitches, some live pitches on video, some great pitch decks that you can review, get a sense of that template, the Airbnb example, the slide bean guide, that ultimate presentation guide that keeps you the format. But the last part of this I really want to hit on is their objections. So a pitch is not just a one and done. You don't wrap up and have somebody go, okay, great, thanks again for your time, see you later. Every single time it's a back and forth, it's asking questions. As mentioned, when they're reviewing your deck, they're thinking, how can I pick this apart? This doesn't make sense to me. I want clarification here. They're writing these notes down as you're pitching. The second it gets done, those questions you're going to get hit with. And if you haven't practiced enough, you don't anticipate what those questions are going to be, Car, they're going to catch you flat-footed. It's incredibly worth your time to poke holes in what you're doing, have investors, people you don't even like, people that are really negative about your company, hitting you with those points of detraction, so that when you can go on, you can say, hey, that's a great question. I've heard it before. Here's how we're going to solve for it. That's a very, very strong way to address a pain point, explaining that, thanking them for their question, explaining that you thought about this and here's how you handle it. And the final thing, and it just relates back to keeping it brief, but if you go through every element of your deck, and I'm talking, you go through your website, you go through your different hyperlinks, you go through your different visual assets, your images, whatever. You ask yourself, does this add value? And if it doesn't, remove it. It's all about keeping this short and sweet. And adding value means either assisting in how you're conveying your idea. It's a key fact, key figure. It isn't just randomly related stuff or anything like that. This one's a little bit tricky, but it takes practice. But I'm confident you'll get there. Well, this brings me to the end of my presentation and the start of the Q&A. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Jake. Really appreciate it. That was an amazing presentation. And yeah, we do have a few questions here. So I know we've already run over our time a little bit. So I'm going to try and get through the questions as quickly as we can. And if you can be as prompt as you can with the answers, that would be great, just so we can get through as many as possible. But the first question is from Darwin Butler. Traditional funding sources and venture capitalists have a long history of discriminating against people of color. What's to say that this won't be the case for us social equity individual applicants? We need something similar to GSL, guaranteed student loan. Show me the money.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, as a social equity founder, the deck is largely stacked against you. The pendulum does swing in the other direction. There are a lot of investors, angels like Sam Shang, venture VC firms like Journey One VC, that my friend Helene Servian runs. And those specifically look for, for BIPOC founders, for social equity companies. So of course, like I said, there are some that will prioritize this. But yeah, you are going into these rooms largely with the deck stacked against you. Angels, they make up their own rules. There are a lot of these high net worth individuals. They'll play their own games. If they like you, they'll want to invest in you. But there is a racist history of where money has flown, who it's flown, which founders it has flown into, and what their backgrounds are. It's a lot of people who look like me. And unfortunately, what this means is you need to be better practiced. You need to bunk what they're going to think, and you need to come in professional. You need to come in polished. But you can't ignore the other different routes out here to raise capital. So you can fundraise from your community. You could do an equity crowdfunding campaign or similar. There's a lot of platforms, including Republic and stuff, and Seed Invest, that are doing these. If you have a great network of people in your community, you can find ways for them to put up cash. As mentioned, most of these checks are $10,000 anyways. You can do an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, to accept checks that are usually less than $50K, to let smaller check writers to the table. You can take out debt. Debt is becoming the most I'd say the most common way founders are raising money in cannabis right now. A lot of the equity has dried up. A lot of these big cannabis specific firms are out of dry powder. They already invested these in companies that are struggling, that they're forced to keep afloat. So they just keep dumping money to make sure their investments, don't end up at a zero. So yeah, the deck is stacked against you, but there are some tools at your disposal. There's also some really good organization and groups that really tie this in together. Ease Momentum, obviously one I work with, have a huge, extremely high opinion of CanOcclusive, of Revel. But there's people out there that understand this problem. I'm happy to speak more on this one. It's definitely one I have very deep feelings about, and I'm happy to teach how to overcome. But
Thank you so much, Jake. That was a great answer. Can you just quickly rename the investors that you do know of that are interested in social equity type businesses? Just for anyone that missed it, just so they can write those down. I think you mentioned 2 or 3.
yeah, I mean, there was one literally dropped into the chat saying we have VC available from Michael here. Yeah, Journey One is Helene Servian's fund. Ease Momentum, they give out non-dilutive investment. So they give you $50,000 and they don't get anything in return. They don't become equity holders in your company. Like I said, with equity crowdfunding, it's pushed, to your community, and they get fractional ownership in your company. I would say, Weber Wild, I've heard mixed results, but parent company as well. Some really good people involved and on the board of that. I would say, what else have I seen throw in? I've seen ArcView throw in, through their fund. But in general, yeah, I'll think more on it.
Thank you so much. Next question is from, and I apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciation. It's from Sviatoslav Paranago. And the question is, as social equity applicants, what percentage of our license and or business should we offer to investors?
Yeah, so this is extremely variable based on how much you're raising, what sort of company you have, what sort of investor you're dealing with, and what stage your company's at. What I like to keep in mind, in kind of the golden rule for early stage fundraising here, is you want to raise enough to give you 18 months of runway before you have to go and raise additional money and start another fund or anything like that. So what will that 18 months of runway cost you? It's extremely variable. If you have an investor that's willing to, give you what you need for 5%, obviously that's a heck of a lot better than settling for one that's going to want 10% of your company. So yeah, there's no clear answer here. Yes, in social equity, there isn't just, 50%, like I said, there is a situation where they're not going to be majority shareholders in this situation. That opens up you to fundraise in other ways. You don't want to be giving away 50% or more of your company anyways, especially if you're early stage. That's what you have probably isn't a good fit for an acquisition anyways, unless maybe it's like an acqui-hire situation in which they're acquiring your assets as well as bringing you on to join their company in like a full-time role. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then second question from, and again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing this, from Sviatoslav. What is the difference in evaluation of delivery companies versus storefronts?
The valuation delivery company versus storefront. I mean, in general, right now, the investment multiplier for retail is consistently been about 1 to 2x. So in general, look, if your company's doing, 7 million in revenue, you can expect, an acquisition offer to be, be roughly similar to that annual revenue, maybe 2 or 3x that. So I've seen nothing but consistency between brick and mortar and delivery.
Cool. And is it the same for companies that have yet to start earning revenue and companies that are pre-revenue, if that makes sense?
Is the valuation the same if they're post or pre-revenue? No. So if they're pre-revenue, a valuation.
And it's a delivery in a retail storefront, because I think that's the question, because I think a lot of the participants on the call, they have yet to open their business, so they're pre-revenue, and I think it's kind of like I could be wrong, but I think the question is like, should I start with my delivery or should I start with like my storefront? What's like a more attractive
Sure.
or lucrative? I could be wrong, but I think that's what the question was.
Yeah. So if you're pre-revenue, you're not going to want to go out and try to develop a valuation. In general, if you were at a top tier accelerator and they were saying, let's prep a valuation, it would be whoever runs it walking around saying, you're 5 million, you're 3 million. It's just guesswork. Now, if you are a post-revenue company and you have numbers you can go into, that's where you can say, look, if the multiple here is 2x for this sort of a business, if it's something like CPG is traditionally 1.5 to 2x, then yeah, you can say, look, I'm going to 2x my revenue and tell you that this is what my valuation is. But what I'd probably want to back up here and say, look, if you're raising money, you don't need a valuation. If you're pre-launch here, you need to think about raising via a safe agreement or a convertible note. And what you're going to need for that's going to be your valuation cap. You're not, when you get into, your Series A and a little bit farther down the road, then yeah, you can hire a CFO and do a proper 409 evaluation. But you do not need that early on. It's overkill. It's all based in guesswork. After you're a little bit farther down the line, start hitting that direction. So if you're trying to open a brick and mortar or a delivery service right now, I'd say go to Y Combinator's website, download the documents for a safe agreement, SAFE, and just roll with that. Have your valuation cap, in there, but no, you don't want to try to figure that out at this stage.
Cool. Thank you so much. Next question is from Raul. Raul asked, how realistic is it to have a lucrative pitch deck for investors given the current climate of the industry?
Sorry, the current climate, how realistic is it? What was the question again?
So how realistic is it to have a lucrative pitch deck for investors given the current climate of the industry?
A lucrative pitch deck. Oh, like your hit rate's going to be high because no. So what I would say is right now is a bad time to be raising money from cannabis specific investors, but surprisingly a pretty decent time to be raising from high net worth individuals, friends and family. Cannabis is more destigmatized than it's ever been before. And a lot of professional investors who haven't been able to touch it, either they're at a larger firm and their firm says we can't touch it, or, in general, like from a tax perspective, they don't want to touch it. There's a lot of non-plant touching opportunities. Like if you're building a brand and you're scaling entirely via co-manufacturing, you're not going to hold a license, and it makes it a little bit easier for them to get involved in these deals. So in general, there's been a lot of movement, more than I would have even expected, from a lot of these investors, including tech investors, including people who sold their companies recently, including even some crypto money. But a lot of the cannabis specific firms, like as mentioned, are kind of out of dry powder. So 90% of companies fail. 90% of startups are gonna fail, unfortunately. So you can keep that ratio in mind. And 75% of all companies bootstrapped. It was the founders putting up their initial capital to get things going. So in general, the odds are never really in your favor, but taking these steps can help.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. The next question is from Darwin. Darwin asked, Jake, can you please develop a list of all your suggestions, the companies and sites you suggested? Thanks. And I think that's on the pitch deck, which will be circulated, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And Darwin, the safe agreement is on the Y Combinator website. Y Combinator, it's a large startup accelerator. There, Bob already dropped it into the chat. Perfect.
Heck yeah. Next question is, so this is from Sam. So once your pitch deck is ready, how do you find pitch events? How do you find you spoke about going to these places and getting, on stage and scanning the room. How do you get to that place?
Yeah. So I always suggest, finding a key advisor who's really plugged into the ecosystem of cannabis, that is attending or even throwing a lot of their own events in the local market, attending the big national ones like MJ Biz or Hall of Flowers. So in general, those can be a great source. Also, once you kind of get on the mailing lists for a lot of these, they'll just hit you with everything. For instance, we're all here in LA, so the Puff Dow events are great. The Hazy events are great. Just get on their email lists, and an easy way to do that, of course, is also just following their social media channels. For the more investor focused stuff, it's typically a lot of the same players putting the stuff on, Connor Global, ArcView, Benzinga. Benzinga Chicago conference is coming up in just a matter of weeks. But they do smaller satellite events all around the country, like all of these organizations do. So it's worth tracking those as they come through. Outside of that, where's another good place? The daily mass emails that you're going to get from a lot of different players in the space. Flower Hire does a really good kind of regular email with a lot of different upcoming events and stuff. The investor Dai Truong, Daitruong. You can find him on LinkedIn and start following his emails. Veridian, those guys put out pretty good emails as well. MJ Biz, theirs are decent. Green Market Report, Green Entrepreneur. And always checking New Cannabis Ventures. I'd say all of those tend to share about upcoming things like pitch events in your area. And I would also suggest do some general startup and tech-related pitch events. I've pushed companies I work with in cannabis to those. They kind of win every time. It's a little bit more of a fun and attractive product, and it's something most people in the room probably haven't heard before. So I tend to notice that cannabis companies do really, really well, even if it's more general. And that's, that's going to Startup Grind and similar.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then, so we have a few other questions, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through them all. And I'm still waiting for a response on that. But one question that we've asked all of the, investors we've got to participate in these webinars, and I think it's a pretty important question to ask is, what are some of the biggest mistakes cannabis entrepreneurs make when pitching investors?
It's definitely going in there and talking trash about other people in the industry. It's, not knowing the competitive landscape is the biggest one, hands down. I've seen plenty of beverage companies talk about how, we're the first who's going to be, doing something with D8 in it. And then ultimately the investor goes, are you kidding me? I'm already invested in Wonder, who has D8. So it's not knowing your competitive landscape is a really big one. I would say, what else is a big area they flub on? Restarting their pitches after they've gotten going. It just throws off everybody's flow. I would say reading sometimes if you come across as not being practiced and somebody's trying to watch you, but especially if you're in person and you're just doing nothing but reading your pitch off of your deck notes, it just is it doesn't work in your favor. But I would say some of the last ones are not having a polished brand, not having a well-designed deck, not having a clear ask, if somebody hits you with a question, what are we talking about today? How much you're raising? You don't hit them with, well, I'll circle back in a couple months and I'll have a better answer for you. You need all that in front of them today. Having your term sheet ready to go. Imagine an investor wants to pull the trigger on you. They say, send over the docs, send over your term sheet. You can't say, well, okay, well, let me go to my lawyer and prepare that. No. You got to send that term sheet and get them to pull the trigger immediately. I would say beyond that, beseeching investors. If you don't hear from them and you're trying to go in cold, don't keep following up with, emails that you think are creative, like, oh, if you haven't responded, what happened? Did you fall into a pit of lava? Like, you see that stuff a lot of times and it doesn't work. Be respectful of their time. Always prioritize the warm intro, and just definitely don't keep hammering them. Hey, have you looked at my deck? Hey, we met at this event and you didn't follow up with me. It doesn't make a difference. They didn't follow up with you. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then I think we have time for one last question. This is a question I had. You talked about competitive landscape, and that was a section of the deck. If you're opening up a dispensary or a delivery in LA, who is your competition? Is it deliveries in other retail stores? I'm guessing, but within what range? Is it
Yeah, I think this is a great one. And you know, I work with Madison of Cadre, you know, through Ease Momentum. And he has a retail and a brand that's coming online. And his big points of differentiation were the fact that he's in the dramatically underserviced South LA community. He's able to cite, look, there's a limited amount of players here. There is no dispensary from a BIPOC founder. And ultimately, you know, that's a big angle for him. He also has a massive parking lot. So of course, his deck, he talks about the events that they can throw in there, talks about different, you know, one of his team members is from Time Warner. So he talks about, you know, different celebrities and stuff that are willing to come in, do shows to kind of support their launch day. To them, he's painting a picture of something that isn't just a retailer. It's a center of community in a region that lacks it with regards to, you know, cannabis retailers that are bringing people together like this. Talks about different classes. It talks about their different price points. Hey, he's going to do budget-friendly cannabis products. He's not here to sell $75, $85 eighths. So you can find it. And if you're trying to, so, you know, look at your location, look at the products you're trying to sell, look at if you have a consumption lounge. I literally saw a message, you know, earlier today about a retailer in Oakland that's going to be inside of a movie theater. This kills me. That was my favorite idea, trying to do like an Alamo Draft House of weed, but it looks like it's finally happening. That's a massive point of differentiation. That, you know, for better or worse, like hasn't really been done before. There's some comparables there, but get creative. And that comes down to the culture, the community, the team behind it. I love the People's Dispensary and their commitment to putting formerly incarcerated as more than 50% of their staff. I mean, that's crazy to me. I mean, it should be standard for every company in the space. So think about those different points of differentiation. But with retail, you got a lot of latitude. With brand or even, you know, co-manufacturer or distro, you know, the wall, it's a little bit of a higher wall.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake. That was amazing. The presentation was amazing. And I think we all really appreciate your time answering those questions and staying on much later than we had scheduled you for. So really appreciate your time. And, you know, yeah, now in closing, thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. The webinar recording will be found on DCR's website, cannabis.lacity.org. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Again, that's dcr.sep@lacity.org. Join us on our next webinar on 9/6/22, so September 6th at 6 p.m. Beachside Chat, Tech Tools for Medical Cannabis. Thanks again for joining us and have a wonderful evening.